Next one comes in from our Patreon. So John says, I love that we have fun, nice guys in the clubhouse, but do you think Batista or Donaldson would have stood for some of our seasonal lows and game costing misplays? Heck no, they wouldn't. They'd have put a little healthy fear into these young guys. We do have veteran leaders like Chapman and Springer, but they're more positive chemistry, lead by example types. This offseason, I'd like to see us bring in a veteran presence who understands the winning at all costs mentality. Someone who's going to call a spade and make things uncomfortable when the young players do young player crap.
So I like this comment, and John's awesome. Kelowna John. He definitely knows this Jays team inside and out. He's a big ball fan. One thing I do want to point out here and everyone knows this, but I think it is good to just kind of keep this in mind when you're comparing the 2015-16 Blue Jays and their runs to the competitive window of the team we're watching right now. Okay? The three players he just mentioned were the core. Edwin Encarnacion, Joey Bats, Bringer of Rain.
Mm-hmm.
In 2015, Josh Donaldson turned 30 years old. Edwin Encarnacion was 33, and Jose Batista was 34. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. this season was 23 years old. Alejandro Kirk, 23 years old. Bo Bichette, 24 years old. Alek Manoah, 24 years old. So there is a decade worth of experience that had been accumulated by the core of that 2015-16 core that didn't exist for our guys this season. And I know it's not exactly, but let's be serious, it's right around 30 years of experience combined. That's a frickin' lot. So maybe John is onto something. Maybe Springer is more of the glue that brings this clubhouse together, and they do need a big bad dad, 36-year-old who's going to take a kid by the collars and kind of like, and I don't even know if when you're talking Gen Z, if that's how if they respond to that anymore, right? Like the suck it up buttercup style of coaching or leading that guys like you and I grew up with, Adam, in our tenure in sports. Mm-hmm. It's changed now. It's different, and I don't know if it would work. And maybe it would. Maybe this is what this team lacks. You'd hope that guys like John Schneider and George Springer are already bringing that to the table, though. You really do.
All right. Couple
Where
thoughts.
are you at on this?
Couple thoughts here for me is that I don't know how effective an outsider can be. Like, to bring in that big bad daddy discipline guy. That sounded so much kinkier than I meant it. All right. So big bad daddy shows up.
Daddy.
Big bad daddy in his leather jacket shows up. Spanking the kids. Oh dear. Anyways.
All right, reel her in.
A Manny Machado type, right? Who can go to Fernando Tatis Jr., get up in his grill and say, hey, we don't do that here.
This isn't about you, yeah.
I don't know how an outsider can do that with this core the way it is, right? With Gurriel, with Biggio, Espinal, like all these kids who came up together, like they've got their chemistry. So for an outsider to come in, that would be really hard to do, I think.
Such a good point.
You would
Such a good point, Adam.
You would need, honestly, like someone like a Max Scherzer or a Justin Verlander, someone with just an unquestionable resume, right?
Just
a first ballot Hall of Famer to come in and have any chance, I think, of really changing the tone of this clubhouse.
And just to help build your case even further, look at what this club wound up doing with Charlie Montoyo. Right? Look at how this team improved when John Schneider took over. The guy that they had chemistry with, the guy that they'd been through the trenches with in the minors. I don't think that they were necessarily not on board with Charlie, but there was a definite shift in the clubhouse when John took over.
And we'll get into this. We're going to talk John Schneider a bit more with the pitching decision later in the episode. But
Yeah.
I do want to say I do think John Schneider is our best chance at a big bad daddy who can discipline these guys because he's been with them through AA, through AAA. He came up with them. So he's not the outsider. We did see the first glimpses of that, like when Vladdy watched his double off the wall, and to just have him be kind of publicly
Scolded.
Right? I think if John Schneider does get the extension that I think he should get, I think it comes with a feather in the cap saying, look, we stand behind you, but you need to get these kids in check. Like, it is now time to buckle down. And I think he's our best chance at having someone that can do that. I don't think there is any other player that we can bring in who can be a raw guy. I don't think there's another outside man. I don't think bringing in Joe Girardi can come in, kick over a Gatorade cooler.
You're almost starting over at that point, because if you do bring in that big bad dad, right, whether it's a player or new management, you almost got to give them a little bit of leeway too. And what Jays fans want is 2023 to be the year, right? So like, you bring in a Joe Girardi, how can you just like expect instant chemistry with this new guy, right?
You know what? Sticking with
you know,
this
like
dad
John
metaphor, Joe Girardi would be like a mean stepdad coming into the picture,
Right.
when you're already 13 and rebellious. It's like, who the hell do you think you are, right? Like, you haven't been through all this with me.
us
You
all
can't
along,
send me
yeah.
to my room right now.
You're not
Like,
my dad.
You're
Yeah.
not my dad, right? But John Schneider, has been there, and maybe
And
can.
we saw glimpses of that too. And I mean, you bringing up him calling out Vladdy is a great example of that. Another example is him moving Vlad and Bo down the lineup. And I know all April, May, June, whenever this team was slumping, a lot of us were saying, why do you not shake up this batting order? That was one thing that Charlie was very regimented in. Was the order was the order. It didn't matter hot or cold. You were slotted into wherever you were slotted in on day 1. You were slotted into on day 80. You were slotted into on day 162. And to watch him be able to communicate with these kids that he had come up through the ranks with, we're going to move you down. The fact he moved Bo back up to the 2-hole when he got hot says a lot, right?
Mhm.
It shows you, if you disappoint, you're going to be moved down in the order, but you are going to be given the opportunity to win back the trust of this management. And I think that does go a long way. I'm with you. Like, I really do get what John is saying. Like, it's a good point. And maybe even 5 years ago, that's how you would shake up a group of kids that aren't really clicking the way you want them to. I just don't know if that's how you would do it with this generation now. But we'll move on.
I got one last thought that I want to
Okay.
add.
Yeah.
With the young core, I have heard this through professional athletes across all sports, whether it's football, whether it's hockey, whatever the case may be. When a young rookie comes into the league on a good Detroit Red Wings team or a good Houston Astros team or whatever the case may be, there can be a situation where they come in, they go on a Stanley Cup run, they win the Stanley Cup, and in their brain they go, oh, this is what professional sports is. We play all year long, and then we go on this deep playoff run. Sometimes we drink champagne, sometimes we cry. And then they never get back to the playoffs again. And they play for 20 years.
Yes.
And they just expected it to be like playoffs at the end of the year, not golfing. And I think that this is me maybe being pessimistic, But there is a real opportunity here for some of these young kids to spend the next 15 years of their career kicking themselves. And I don't think they realize it yet. I think there's a situation where they came up, hot young team, were playoff contenders, were World Series contenders, whatever the case may be. But once this team does get blown up, right? Like once the core is actually gone, once Bo is playing in Colorado, he's going to have a real hard look in the mirror and go, I'm never getting to the playoffs again. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a tough pill to swallow. And I don't think a lot of them appreciate that yet. That, as much as the fans are like, hey, we got a playoff window here of maybe 4 or 5 years before this gets blown up. Like the players also need to realize that like once they're gone, they're not just getting traded to the Dodgers or to the Mets or whatever. Like they might be in Arizona. They might be in Detroit.
Listen, since the Toronto Blue Jays inception in 1977, this organization has made the playoffs 9 times. Okay? That's in 45 years. So about 20% of the time you make the playoffs. And yes, this Blue Jays core, this organization right now is in a window. And I think you summed it up really well that, these young guys have gone through the growing pains of getting to where they are, but now they truly feel like, okay, here we are. This is going to be every year now, and that's not necessarily the case. And you can't blow 8-1 leads.
You can't. Just can't.
And there's a lot of blame to go around. Listen, I know that there's a lot of people calling for John Schneider's head because of his decision with Gausman, and of course we're going to get into that because there's a pile of it there. I know there's a ton of people saying trade Bo. He made a huge mistake running as hard as he could and getting in Springer's way. I know there's a lot of people who say Tim Meza and Anthony Bass, line him up. Let's get the firing squad going. Listen, there are a lot of reasons why you need a lot of reasons to collapse in the 6th after having an 8-1 lead. Like there's not one person to blame here. This was a team effort to lose like they lost. We really appreciate all of you within the walk-off community. This thing continues to grow and become an animal of its own. It's a little bit overwhelming, but honestly, we love talking Blue Jays baseball and all the interaction that you folks are involved with us. Thank you so much. Discord, feel free to join it. That is always free. The show, or the link is in the show notes. You can follow us on Twitter at Walk Off Podcast, on Instagram, the Walk Off Podcast. And if you are watching on YouTube currently and you're not subscribed, we'd really appreciate if you hit that subscribe button. All the best, everybody. Cheers.